You are in the correct webinar, in case you were wondering. I'm here, Rob's here, and also, as you see, we have Harry Carr-Ellison also with us. Harry is from the Lost Tea Company. He's a founder of the Lost Tea Company, in fact. And Lost Tea, they bring tea from Pindaya in southern Shan State to the UK. And those of you in the UK who gave us your address should have received a small care package from Lost Tea, courtesy of Sampan, to help give you a flavour of Burma and to add to the whole experience of this tour, as you can't be here, or many of you can't be here in the flesh. So before Rob kicks off on session 5, Harry's going to very quickly give an introduction to Burmese tea and to the Lost Tea Company. And if you haven't already tried the tea that you've been sent, then Harry can give you the best tips about how to enjoy that on tour. So I'm going to hand over to Harry now for the next couple of minutes to talk about Burmese tea. Harry, it's all yours.
Brilliant, thanks Bertie. And I'd just like to say again, well done for this week, and a big thank you to Rob. It has been most enjoyable, especially having lived in Myanmar for the last 5 years. To have a better understanding of what went on during the Second World War has been very eye-opening, to say the least, and very enjoyable. I won't talk for long, I promise, because I know if you're as excited for tonight's installment as I am, this little interlude should be as quick as possible. So yeah, thanks. As Bertie kindly said, you should have got a little package from us, so let me just quickly tell you a little bit about it. We are from Pindaya in southern Shan State. If you know Myanmar at all, they're Inle Lake, which is quite a popular destination. We are just north of there, and it is a very similar place, very beautiful, very scenic, and I really hope one day you might be able to come and visit us there. The people we work with are a group of 256 smallholder farmers who all grow their own tea, hand pick it, and in some cases will manufacture it themselves, sun drying it. But the majority goes to a collective factory in Pindaya where we help to process it. We do sell a bit locally in some of the tourist areas, but predominantly we ship to the UK, where we have a range of products from the loose teas, the green and black tea, and also some dried ginger, which is grown amongst the tea bushes. But what I'd really like to highlight is the edible tea, So it comes from the same tea bush as the green and the red tea, all one bush. But what happens is after the leaf is picked, it is steamed and fermented for 3 months. After that, it is washed and mixed with some oil, some citrus, and it becomes the base to a range of different dishes, from curries to rice dishes, but predominantly it is found in a fermented tea leaf salad, or locally known as lepet thok. This is a national dish in Myanmar and is eaten across the country, from Yangon up to Mandalay and everywhere in between. A few things you can do with the pack you have got isn't on the screen now, I understand that. You've got the tea leaves, but you've also got the bean and nut mix. Now, they are the 2 base ingredients in a lepet thok. So alongside that, the image on the right there, you just want to put some cabbage and some tomatoes, a squeeze of lime. And if you're like me, like chili, I really recommend a good amount of that. On the left, it's just another quick recipe you can do is put it with some rice and some tomatoes and onion, and it kind of makes a bit of a lepet tamin, and is also very, very delicious. If you'd like any other kind of recipe ideas or would like to know a little bit more about us, please just go onto our website, lostteacompany.com, or I would love to hear from you, so please just ping me an email at harry@lostteacompany.com. Anyway, sorry for that little brief interlude, and now I'll of course hand over to Rob for the real entertainment of this evening. Anyway, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy tonight.
Thanks, Harry. So just quickly, like I say, those of you in the UK should have received a little package of Harry's tea from us. If you didn't, please let me know, and we'll make sure that gets to you. And those of you elsewhere, Harry, I suppose it's best just to go onto your site or to contact you if they were looking to get some tea.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we do ship abroad as well, so we're happy to try and help out with that where we can. But yeah, the best thing to do is just send me an email or jump onto our website.
Great, Harry, thanks so much. See you soon.
Brilliant, thanks, Bertie. Yeah, great.
Cheers. Okay, thank you to Harry. Rob, it's all yours now. So just quickly, yeah, so okay, enjoy the tea. If you haven't received any tea, let us know and we'll try and send you some. Regarding to today's session, we are with the Chindits, and as always, it was very nice, yesterday to hear from Anthony and Malcolm on the audio. So do please follow in their footsteps and raise your hand, your virtual hand, during the presentation. And we will try and get you on to the audio to put any questions or comments to Rob at the end of the session. Rob, how are you getting on?
I've gone and I'm nearly there. I've just gone and put my drawing tool on, but that means that I can't now touch my. Here we are. I'm there soon. I'm just going to work out how to get my PowerPoint up. I'm assuming you can see that now.
We can, yeah. So
the problem is when I put that on, I then lose. No, here we are. I've got it. So let me just go onto that. I've got the spotlight. We should be ready to go. This is a bit of a problem actually. Let me.
It's all right. I think.
Here we are. If I see what I want to be able to do is show everyone the map.
Do you need to go back to the?
The problem is I've got so many screens open here. That's a bit of a challenge. Just give me a few moments, everyone, and
sure.
we'll.
That's fine. Just to reiterate, everyone. So you have some maps from today's session in the dashboard section. 2 of those I was unable to upload for some technical reasons, but they will be sent out to you all with the email tomorrow morning, so you can study them closely at your leisure tomorrow. That's it from me. I think, Rob, are you all set?
I think we're sorted.
Perfect. All right, Rob, I'll leave it with you then.
Thank you very much, Bertie, and thank you very much, Harry, for your introduction about tea. I'm looking forward to tasting mine. I hope you all have got your hats. Although as we go north, there's less of a need to wear them, I feel, because we're getting into cooler climes. And what I want to do today is talk about Myitkyina. For many years, I struggled to understand how to pronounce this. I mean, one of the problems of being a historian is that when you start off doing book learning, you don't know how to pronounce things. And it was only in my first trip to Burma in 1999 that I had someone tell me that it rhymes with Kitchener. So that's my advice to you. Myitkyina rhymes with Kitchener. So here we are, Myitkyina. Myitkyina is the capital of Kachin territory, way up in the north. It's about, well, it's a very, very long way from Yangon. And there are 2 ways of getting there. One is by flying, and the other is by flying all the way from Yangon. The other is perhaps by flying to Mandalay and then getting the boat up, or getting the train up the railway corridor. It's a difficult subject tonight because there is a lot to cover, and I don't want to inundate you with too much detail because there is 4 years of war here. It's got intense political action between China, America, and the British. And there's a lot going on with the Chindits and so on. So we'll just do it bit by bit, and hopefully we'll all stay together and not get lost. And when we do this for real next year or the year after, and we're all on the bus, we can go into the sort of detail that makes this sort of stuff really interesting. So session 5 tonight, Indaw and Myitkyina and the Chindits, 1943-44. So I'm just going to step through the story, but I'm going to start with this beautiful view of Myitkyina. It's a lovely town on the a great bend of the Irrawaddy. It's a great place to stay, and traveling up and down the Irrawaddy here is absolutely fabulous. As I said yesterday, it can get difficult in the dry season because of the sandbanks and so on, but The Irrawaddy is a magnificent river, and it is always changing, and it's such an incredible lifeline to the people all the way up and down Burma, and it's extraordinary to see that life express itself on the river. One of the great joys I have of tripping up and down the Irrawaddy is just watching people, and it's, you know, tourists are 1 in 1,000. There aren't many of us, and we're the ones sitting there in leisure drinking our gin and bitters, whereas everyone else is plying a trade and carrying on their daily business, and it's been ever thus, I suppose. Myitkyina is one of my favorite places in Burma. It's a very, very different place to the south. It has a very different atmosphere to Yangon, very different atmosphere even to Mandalay, different sorts of people. And I think one of the things that has struck me over the years is the very, very wide, and we have mentioned this over the last few days, the very wide diversity of ethnicities in Burma, all held together in this construct which is known as Burma or Myanmar, but which constitutes a whole variety of different ethnic backgrounds and cultures and religions and approaches to life. And that's really a segue to talk about tonight, because in Kachin territory, that area in what I describe as northern Burma, and just as an aside, you would have heard me talking about northern Burma, upper Burma, central Burma, and southern Burma. Well, we're in northern Burma now, and the area between where we are now and Mandalay, that's upper Burma. I'm now in northern Burma, the area at Myitkyina and further up. And it's worth just spending a little bit of time orientating ourselves to the ground. There have been a number of comments in the last few days about how complicated it all seems to be. Let me assure you, it's much easier when we're on the ground and we're traveling, and we're doing it at the pace at which we could describe what we see. But it's a very interesting part of the world, this, because we have quite a dramatic contrast between a whole series of low-lying, relatively flat, teak-producing plains with very deep valleys and then high hills. And I've always described these as the two horseshoes. So there's a massive horseshoe here in northern Burma. So here we are, let's orientate ourselves to the map. This is Myitkyina. This is where the photograph was taken. There's a big horseshoe here which runs up on the inside of the Pak Toi ranges, the Pak Toi ranges. These hills here which border on India. And if you just follow down here, you can see Mokokchung here. These are the Naga Hills. In the days of the war, this was known as the Naga tribal territory, and where my pointer is there. And over here, further south, this is the Naga Hills territory. And there's Kohima down here. So basically, Kohima and Myitkyina, they're pretty much on a par. But here we are. We've got this big horseshoe of relatively dry, flat plains with a few ranges of hills coming out every now and again. You can see this here, and a big range of hills running right down through the middle of the territory to Mogong, and we're going to talk about Mogong a little bit later. This particular end of the horseshoe and this valley that runs up here into the Panksha Pass in India is known as the Hawking Valley, or to the poor refugees who had to walk out of here in 1942, the Valley of Death. It's very, very intensely malarious, and still is. But we didn't have too much time to talk about the wonderful people who live up here, the Kachin people, nor indeed the stuff they produce, the beautiful rocks that all the ladies want to buy and put on their fingers, and so on, and the teak as well. Just as an aside here, there aren't many roads even now. There are quite an extraordinary dearth of roads, and I'm always struck, actually, even in northern Burma, looking across into India, and even this part of India is still remarkably remote. This is the northern Naga Hills. There are many more roads in the northern Naga Hills than there are even in Burma today. It's quite an extraordinary phenomenon. Anyway, so that's just really to orientate ourselves to the ground. This is the area that we are focusing on today. We're focusing on the area between the Naga Hills here I haven't mentioned, of course, the Chinwin, which runs down here where my pointer is, and the Irrawaddy, which comes down here through Myitkyina. But the area we're going to talk about here in terms of the war effort from 1942-43 and the start of 1944 really focuses on this area here. And in terms of the Chindits, the area from Mogong further south. And I'm just going to move to the next slide to show you that. So immediately underneath that, here we have, we've got Myitkyina up here, and then we've got the Irrawaddy running due south, a big bend in the Irrawaddy down here. Coming down here, we've got a river coming up here called the Shweli River, and this runs all the way down to Mandalay, which is probably where my pointer is there. On the left-hand side, you can see the Chinwin coming down here as well. And then on the left-hand side, in Manipur itself, we've got Imphal, and you can see the dramatic difference in terrain between most of what we have in Burma and the very, very mountainous terrain in Imphal. So I suppose the three sorts of ranges we're talking about in this area, we're talking about 5,000 to 6,000 feet. A little bit higher in the Patkois up here, we're talking about 8,000 feet. But way up here in the north and up here on the Chinese side of the border, we're talking about 18,000 feet. Really quite serious. Lots of snow in winter and quite a bit of snow in summer as well. Lots of opportunities for developing a ski program in northern Burma. Right, so let's talk about why on earth were the Allies interested in this part of the country. But I think, just before we get onto that, hopefully you'll get a sense of how big this place is, how remote it is. In order to get anywhere, it takes weeks of walking or a very long time flying. Oh, the one thing I have forgotten to say, of course, is that crossing over the northern territory of Burma here is the Hump airlift. And what you can't see way up, so crossing over here, I'm on the wrong screen for you, is the Hump airlift into Yunnan. And really above my, the map up here is Lido. And Lido, as you all well know now, is the base of the American Hump operations. So there's an enormous amount of aircraft traffic over here. The nearest Japanese airfield actually is Myitkyina. And the Japanese try very hard to shoot down as many American C-47s and C-46s as they can. And there's quite a considerable American effort to protect those aircraft with fighters, Mustangs primarily in here, and also from Kunming on the Chinese side over here. But clearly, Myitkyina, being able to capture Myitkyina would be a very helpful thing for the war effort, because it would mean that at a stroke, the Japanese would no longer be able to attack aircraft. And indeed, actually, if Myitkyina was taken, there wouldn't be much need for an airlift at all, because we would be able, the Americans would be able to drive a road from Lido all the way down through Death Valley, the Hawking Valley. There we have my pointer works, and all the way to Myitkyina itself. And where my pointer is on the map now is the site of the new Burma Road, often known as the Lido Road, or the Chinese called it the Stillwell Road, in order to annoy the British, actually. And the aim was to be able to drive it from Myitkyina and all the way across here into China. So in a nutshell, that was the strategic purpose for American interest in particular in northern Burma after 1942, and responsibility for that was a gentleman called Vinegar Joe Stillwell. And let's go and talk about these characters now. But before I get to Vinegar Joe, I've got another interesting character to introduce you to. This fellow here, who is wearing his hat. He's obeyed instructions. He's also got a nice bushy beard and a pretty pretty good moustache as well. This is Orde Wingate. Peter the Hermit, Slim called him in his 1956 fantastic book. If you haven't read it, it's the first book you need to read about the Burma Campaign, A Defeat into Victory. And Peter the Hermit's a pretty good description for this character, because he's an unusual man. And I need to say at the outset that when we analyze the operations of the Chindits in 1943 and 44, and we'll spend a few minutes talking about them in a moment, it's really important that you do so, separating out in your mind Wingate as a man and what Wingate did as part of the Chindits. 1943, an operation called Operation Longcloth, and in 1944, an operation called Operation Thursday. Because he's such an unusual man, he creates quite extraordinary passions amongst people, both defending him and attacking him. And I have tried very hard over the years. I can't promise to be completely unbiased in the matter, but I have tried over the years to be as scientific as I can about Wingate, his ideas, and what he achieved. And I've created this phrase that I use all the time now, which is called strategic effect or operational effect, which is to say what we need to do is we need to judge what happened in Burma at the hands of this man and the Chindits in terms of their contribution to the war effort. And it's the only real way in which we can make valid judgments, in my view, because when you do get characters who are unusual, who are out of the ordinary, who are visionary, who do things in a very different way to the ordinary human being, it does create extremes of response. Orde Wingate was a very interesting character. He was commissioned into the Royal Artillery, and he had always been a loner. We don't have time to go into this tonight, but he was a loner. His family were loners. They were part of a Christian evangelical group called the Plymouth Brethren, who regarded themselves as set apart by God for a divine purpose. And Wingate had this attitude in spades. He was a very biblical man. He probably knew most of the Old Testament off by heart, and he built his life around being this Christian exceptional, which meant that he was used to being battered back. He was used to being a loner. He was used to having to force his views onto groups of people, particularly senior people who didn't want to listen to him. He had done a very good job for Wavell in Eritrea in 1940, and where he had come to Wavell's attention. And in 1942, Wavell had called them to Burma to set up a guerrilla warfare school in Burma. Of course, as we now know, the Japanese came and swept through the country before any of that could be established. So Wingate was one of those refugees fleeing back to India. He promptly pulled himself in before Wavell, stamped his feet in the ground, gave him a salute and said, "Sir, I think I've got a solution for solving the problem of the Japanese." And Wavell said, "Okay, well, what can you do for me?" And Wavell reminded him of an old British military doctrine relating to long-range penetration, LRP operations. Wingate didn't invent it. He took it out of British military doctrine, which said that quite considerable feats could be achieved by operating behind enemy lines and denying space and places to the enemy. This had been a part of British operations in South Africa during the Boer War and, of course, in the Northwest frontier. And Wavell said to Wingate, "Okay, old chap, go away. I'll give you 2 battalions. I'll give you a battalion of Gurkhas. I'll give you some of your old mates from the Bush Warfare School in Maymyo in Burma, now known as 142 Commando, and I'll give you a battalion of the King's Regiment, all 30-year-old chaps who needed a bit of fizz to get them ready for battle." But so he had 2.5 battalions essentially, a brigade, which he called 77 Brigade, and he immediately got 77 Brigade together and started training fiercely for what he knew would be a very tough ask, a long-range patrol behind Japanese lines in Burma. Now, you know, because I mentioned it to you, that the original plan was to be able to deploy Wingate in Arakan along with an amphibious operation to support the advance of the 14th Indian Division. And wouldn't that have been marvelous? That would have been just the ideal plan to use Wingate. As you know, the amphibious operation was turned off. Wingate was still available, but Irwin didn't take up the offer of Wingate. He probably thought Wingate was a little bit too left field for him. So Wingate was left to do his own thing. There was another plan in early 1943 to be able to associate and advance into Burma, into upper and northern Burma from Imphal in support of an advance by 4 Corps. But 4 Corps was in no way able to undertake an advance in early 1943. It wasn't well enough trained. There weren't enough troops. There wasn't enough ammunitional stores. I mean, they had a week's worth of stores in Imphal because of that line of communication problem that I've mentioned a number of times before. So Wingate pleaded with Wavell to be able to go away and do an operation on his own. Wavell gave in and said, yes, go away. And so in February 1943, between February 1943 and May 1943, Wingate took his 77th Brigade on Operation Longcloth into Japanese-held Burma. Now, we'll come back to that in a moment. Now, the other character who we need to introduce ourselves to is Vinegar Joe Stilwell. We've mentioned him briefly in our chat about the battle for central Burma. Very good soldier, very good fighting man, knew China very well, spoke Chinese well. And this man on the right-hand photograph who he's sitting with is a chap called Merrill, who is a commander of a composite brigade modeled on Wingate's 77 Brigade, which the American press called Merrill's Marauders. And Merrill's Marauders were basically in 1944 to do what Wingate had tried to do in 1943. So here is Wingate and Merrill sitting together. In a nutshell, Vinegar Joe Stilwell, once the retreat had been completed in 1942, had 2 main roles. The first role was as Chief of Staff to Chiang Kai-shek, and the second was to train up the Chinese army to be able to take them back into Burma and defeat the Japanese in battle. Now, the first task that he was given was something that he didn't really like doing. He wasn't very good at. He wasn't a politician. He got very angry with Chiang Kai-shek. He couldn't stand Chungking. He couldn't stand British headquarters, first of all in Delhi, and then 1943-44 in Kandy. Certainly after Mountbatten came in October 1943. And so he really spent most of his time doing what he liked best, which is putting on his duck shooter uniform, which is how Slim described Stilwell on the right there, and training his Chinese troops. And to be fair to this man, a very Serbic, Anglophilic man, he did that job incredibly well. And in due course of time, about 60,000 Chinese troops were taken from a state of ill preparedness to fight the Japanese to a state at which in 1944 they did quite a remarkable job in operations in northern and upper Burma. So this is Vinegar Joe. So we have 2 quite unique individuals. Why is it that places like the Burma Campaign end up with characters like Wingate and Vinegar Joe? It's just my luck. But they're 2 of the central characters in this particular story. Let's just go back to Wingate and to Operation Longcloth. And this map from the website Chindits.info is very good. Don't worry too much about the detail, apart from, and the reason I like it is because it shows that there were 2 major columns of troops which were developed here by Wingate for this expedition. The one in blue, the northern column, and the one in red, the southern one. The northern column in blue were British troops, basically the King's Regiment and some of 142 Commando, and those in red, essentially the troops of a Gurkha battalion. So what happened was that Wingate, and this is something we need to ponder here, Wingate very quickly had to come up with a modus operandi, or even a modus vivendi for delivering a long-range penetration operation. There were no instruction manuals for him. He had to make it all up. He had to help him the fertile mind of Michael Calvert, Mad Mike Calvert, who he had first met in Burma. And Calvert and Wingate got on particularly well. They were both individualistic. They both liked fighting. They were both they were both soldiers. Wingate, Calvert didn't particularly like staff work. He didn't like commanding things. He just liked fighting, and that was one of the criticisms that was made of Calvert later on. But they basically had to create an idea or a concept of operations for operating behind enemy lines. Now, to cut a very long story short, 1943 was a bit of a disaster. 77 Brigade set out over from Tamu over the Chinwin with about 3,000 men. They came back with 2,200. And of that remaining 2,200 who came back, only about 600 were subsequently fit for operations. Most of the men on this operation in 1943, over a period of 4 months, marched about 1,000 miles. They learned lots and lots of things. Slim was to describe this as a very expensive schooling, but I still believe it was a necessary schooling. And you learn how to do things properly, of course, and you learn how not to do subsequently things that go badly wrong. And the biggest mistake Wingate made here was actually crossing the Irrawaddy. You can see the Irrawaddy coming down on the right-hand side of the map. Here we are. For the period between the 13th of February and the 18th of March, the Northern Column did a good job of cutting the railway down here south of Indaw, making itself known in this area of Upper Burma. And likewise, the columns underneath did a good job at the same time, getting to the Irrawaddy a little bit earlier than the Northern Column. Wingate then decided that his columns would cross the Irrawaddy, and it was a serious mistake because he didn't have the equipment, the boat equipment or anything like it, to be able to get back over the Irrawaddy. And what he didn't realize is that this huge amount of space over here that had very, very few roads or tracks, very few indeed, but there are no major arterial routes in this area at all. Well, on the eastern side of the Irrawaddy, it's very, very different. It's has a significant number of roads, and this is the area where the Japanese were able very, very quickly to concentrate their forces to counterattack the menace that Wingate posed to them. So Operation Longcloth taught Wingate a lot. He knew from this experience that he needed intimate air support. He needed to have aircraft available to support him when he needed it. He needed heavy weapons. He couldn't carry artillery with him. He needed mortars, and he basically needed to carry everything on his back. Well, this is a bit of a problem, of course, because the average weight that the individual soldier had on their back was about 70 pounds. Well, 70 pounds, you know, on day one might be okay, day two might be okay. When you've been doing it for 4 months, it's absolutely impossible because the soldiers need to be taking in about 3,500, 4,000 calories a day. No one got anywhere near that. You might have been lucky to get 1,500 calories a day. And so the men became literally a wasting asset, and yet the stuff they had to carry didn't reduce in weight at all. And the real problem here, of course, is that you're carrying stuff that you don't really know whether you're going to need to use or not. So you're carrying lots of heavy weapons that you might use here and you're not going to use in the period before then. So you then need to think about, well, is there a better way of doing this? Shall I arrange for airdrops here? I walk in with virtually nothing and I'll pick stuff up as I go and have drops. But the other really important thing to say about this is that this entire concept of operations, this long-range penetration operation, was about guerrilla warfare. It's about operating behind enemy lines. It's about doing things that the Japanese didn't expect, popping up where they don't expect, disappearing again, not being able to be traced, not pushing yourself into a corner here where the Japanese can identify you very quickly. Japanese actually, as soon as they knew the Chindits had crossed the Irrawaddy, just put lots of patrols up and down the Irrawaddy. It became very, very, very difficult for the return. Reading all the memoirs of the troops involved became very difficult to cross back because the Japanese had basically staked out every mile of the route. But this is something I want to get across tonight. This is about guerrilla warfare, because when we come to the next operation, Operation Thursday, life was actually a little bit different, and Wingate's thinking on the hoof changed to the extent that what we then had in 1944 was not what we had in 1943. Now, let's just draw Longcloth to a close. When Wingate got back and he went across the Chindwin and was taken to Tamil and to Imphal, he believed that he would be court-martialed for the loss of a third of his brigade. He really thought the whole thing had been a disaster. He was very depressed. He was very upset, in fact, about the whole venture, and sort of came into Imphal with his tail between his legs. But for lots of very good reasons, India Command at the time in Delhi decided that this was a story that was worth spinning and advertising to the world. And the message was 3,000 British and Indian troops, they were Gurkha troops, but British and Indian troops had sallied forth into Japanese-occupied Burma. They had caused casualties, they had roamed at will, they had carried out the function of the classic guerrilla, and they had triumphed. Now, none of that was true, of course, but the propaganda effect was very significant. Not perhaps on the Japanese, but on the Americans, because if I haven't mentioned already, then I do apologize. But of course, the whole of the Burma campaign is a story of a conflict between Britain and America about how best to recover Burma. And the British were always regarded by the Americans as being reluctant to get themselves involved in a land campaign in Burma. Well, said Churchill, here you have great evidence of the fact that I'm sending my troops into Burma and they're doing great things. Wingate's chutzpah, Wingate's sort of arrogant self-belief came charging back in droves. He wrote a report, which is freely available in the National Archives. I can email it to you if you want. It's quite an interesting report. He wrote a report. He refused anyone permission in India Command to edit it. It's quite scurrilous, actually. Parts of the report aren't impressive. And he sent it directly to Churchill. I don't think Churchill read it all. He read the first page and he said, here is a man of vision and character who can command our armies in Burma, and I want you to give him everything you need to enable him to defeat the Japanese. He took him to Quebec on the Queen Mary. Wingate was very, very good in these one-to-one sessions. He met Roosevelt and the senior American members of the combined chiefs of staff. And he persuaded them that there was a very good way of defeating the Japanese, and it was by doing this. Stilwell set up Merrill's marauders as a consequence of Wingate's operation in 1943. Wingate came back to, by the way, Claude Auchinleck, who was the new Commander-in-Chief of India, was asked for his views on Wingate's paper. Auchinleck's paper and response to the combined chief of staff is a model of self-restraint and calmness. And he identified all the flaws in Wingate's arguments while still being positive and supportive. And Auchinleck was not a blimp. He had sponsored the long-range patrol group in North Africa, and the SAS in North Africa as well, in their raids on Italian airfields and German airfields. So he understood this whole concept of long-range penetration, but he was able to prick Wingate's bubble in a number of areas, not least of all around air power, about the ferocity of the Japanese fighting. This is something I also think that Wingate always underestimated, the ferocity of the Japanese fighter. Anyway, to cut a long story short, because we will run out of time if I just bang on about the Operation Longcloth, Wingate came back to Burma with carte blanche, a blank check to cash on the bank of India Command to mount another operation. And that takes us to 1944. And before we get to the next Wingate operation, I just need very, very briefly, and it will be very brief, to talk about what Stilwell was doing. Well, Stilwell was doing a number of things. First of all, he was preparing his Chinese to advance down the Hawking Valley towards Myitkyina. He had been reinforced by a composite force called Galahad, or Merrill's Marauders, American battalions of American soldiers here on the left, the photograph on the left. And he was also doing work with the Cation irregulars or Cation levies, and working very closely with the British in Force 136, which was the Special Operations Executive Organization in the Far East. And the work amongst the Kachin levies was essentially a British one. But the Americans took advantage of it, and the American equivalent of Force 136 was the OSS 101 organization, which learnt from Force 136 and helped build up the use of Kachin levies. So here we are in 1944, summer 1944. We've got Stilwell in command of Chinese, Americans with Merrill's Marauders, and Force 101. And their aim was to march down the Hawking Valley, push the Japanese in front of them. We're talking about the 18th Division. This is Mutaguchi's old division. Very stretched, actually, but a fearsome division nevertheless, who had basically taken control of the river valleys from Myitkyina to Mogong and north. There'd be a very tough proposition to move. And Stilwell's plan was to just come down the Hawking Valley, dominate the valley, push the Japanese out, get to Myitkyina, capture the airfield, and then fight any subsequent battles that were necessary then. So that was going on from February 1944, at the same time as the first part of Operation Thursday began. Now, Operation Thursday, very big operation, very quickly. Let me talk you through this. Operation Thursday was an attempt by Wingate to dominate the area south of Myitkyina in order to support Stilwell. So if these were orders that were given to him by Slim, that there was a divergence in Wingate's idea about what Slim wanted and what Slim wanted. We don't have time to talk about that tonight. Suffice to say, there was a significant divergence driven by the fact that Wingate wanted to be able to do his own thing. Actually, I'm going to mention this now. Wingate had now become so committed and believed in the LRP concept to the extent that he didn't believe it would ever be possible for conventional forces of the kind that Slim had in Manipur, around Imphal, ever to invade upper and northern Burma. He thought the answer was long-range penetration divisions. So the force that he had in 1944, 6 whole infantry brigades flying into strong points in the area between Indaw and Myitkyina, and carrying on all the way through Thailand and down to Malaya and across Thailand to Vietnam. He thought and did believe that this was actually the logical outcome of the thinking that he had been developing. Unfortunately, there wasn't much depth behind the thinking. And I think this is really, really clear from how Thursday outworked itself. Thursday, in my view, was a good plan, but actually there were very, very significant flaws to it that weren't obvious at the time, but were a result of the fact that the way in which Wingate tried to solve some of the problems from Longcloth now meant that actually the LRP operations were no longer guerrilla forces. They were to be conventional forces dumped in the middle of Japanese territory, designed to defend themselves and operate offensively, but with only half the kit, very little of the heavy weapons, and none of the air power. Look, there's a whole series of conversations that need to take place, do take place amongst people like me and the historians of this around the what went wrong with Thursday. But let me just quickly tell you the story. Wingate was given 6 brigades of very fine troops. The idea was that 3 brigades, the 16th Brigade under Brigadier Bernard Ferguson, 77th Brigade under his old friend Mike Calvert, and the 101st Brigade under a very good and experienced Gurkha officer, Joe Lentane, would fly in, first of all, to 5 sites in the area between Myitkyina and Indaw. Indaw is the nodal point for control of the railway from Mandalay to Myitkyina. And you'll often hear historians talking about the railway corridor. Well, if I just go back a few slides and to remind you of this picture here at the start, you can actually see this is the railway corridor here. So this is from Google Earth this afternoon, and you can actually see the geographical features of this this corridor outside of the jungled hills that surround it. Very significant feature. This was the area with Indaw down here that that the Chindits were going to dominate, with a landing site over here known as Chowringhee, after that famous street in Calcutta, and it's there only really because it had an airfield. It's on the wrong side of the Irrawaddy. Another called Piccadilly about there, another called Broadway about here, and another called Aberdeen, where my really on that line there where the pointer is. Let's just go forward to the map. So the idea was that 3 brigades would fly in, and sorry, 2 brigades would fly in to Chowringhee and Piccadilly and Broadway, and poor old Bernard Ferguson would walk in from Lido. Right, just think about that map. This is Lido walking in. It's 400 miles. So they began in March, and sadly they had to carry a lot of their kit with them. And I think it was one of the biggest mistakes of the operation. The original plan, actually, for the whole of Thursday was that everyone would walk in, but Quebec gave Wingate a fantastic military asset in the form of the Air Commando, which comprised about 300 aircraft. He had 12 glider towing Dakota C-47 Skytrains. They had 36 Mustang fighters. The fighters would be based out here in the territory with him. He had 100 light planes, the L-1 and the L-5 Sentinel light planes, and 150 gliders, by which most of the troops would be carried out to their strong points. Let me just quickly talk about the strong points. The idea of the strong points, and the main strong points were to be White City, right on the railway. That's Calvert's base, White City, famous place. You can visit it now, right on the railway. Another one at Piccadilly, another one at Broadway, another one at Aberdeen. Chowringhee was not going to be kept for very long. It was basically there to get the troops into the area. We're going to run out of time, so I've got to really quickly wrap up now and say, within days of the troops arriving, and the whole operation actually went remarkably well, considering the enormous logistical effort, the enormous planning effort, all done in very quick time. But the real problem here was that the strong points that Calvert and Wingate had cooked up, the idea that they'd cooked up between the end of 1943 and the start of 44, so the end of Longcloth and this, the idea was actually didn't work. The idea of the strong point was that each brigade would have a battalion in the strong point. The strong point would be self-defending, so the garrison would defend it, would operate it. It would have a Dakota strip in the middle of it. It would grow its own rice. It would produce its own eggs from chickens and ducks. It would be a long way from the Japanese, who wouldn't be able to attack it. It would have a battalion to protect it, and the 3 other battalions in the brigade would conduct offensive operations from it. But of course, that's all well and good in theory, and it's great on paper. It doesn't work when what it does is acts as a magnet to all of Japanese attention in northern Burma, which is exactly what happened. So within days, very, very intensive fighting started taking place in White City and Broadway. And I'm going to have to bring this to a close. Basically, what had happened in the first 6 weeks was the Japanese closed down on the strong points. They ended up fighting for their lives. Chowringhee was given up within a few days because, as I said, it was there because of the airfield. Piccadilly wasn't landed on for reasons I don't have time to go into tonight. So what we had was Aberdeen, White City, and Broadway, all fighting like mad and doing a very good job of fighting of the Japanese. Aberdeen, which was poor old Bernard Ferguson's, after he had been down to fight in Indaw, came back to Aberdeen. Then what I haven't mentioned is that at the end of February, Wingate was killed in an air crash. His headquarters was being moved from Imphal out into Assam because of Operation Hugo, and the B-24 bomber he was in crashed and he died. So the man who was given responsibility for taking over was that very experienced man, the commander of the 111th Brigade. It's down there as the 1st Brigade, Brigadier Joe Lintain, quite a remarkable man. He was given command of the Chindits, met up with Slim, and Slim reminded Lintain that the whole purpose of Thursday was to support Stilwell up here in Myitkyina. So to cut a very long story short, Lintain created a new base at Blackpool there. All of the Chindits, surviving Chindits, moved north to Blackpool, quite an onerous operation in itself. Wounded men were taken off on the nearby lake with seaplanes, and Blackpool then became the primary strong point for Operation Thursday. Again, it was the honeypot to these nasty stinging Japanese bees and came under an enormous amount of pressure. And as time went on, and with discussions with Stilwell, it was determined that the entire surviving Chindit division, the 3rd Indian division, would go and support Stilwell in Mogong in the north, and those who were exhausted and wounded would be flown out to India. And that's what happened at the end of Operation Thursday. And we had the 77th Brigade in particular taking responsibility for the battle at Mogong. And I just need very quickly to remind you on the map, just where's the best map to show you? Yes, there we are. So Mogong is under there. I've got something showing there. There we are. There's Mogong there, and there's Myitkyina. So what we have is we've got Stilwell reaching down and capturing the airfield at Myitkyina, but desperate about his right flank, and he instructs Lintain to deploy troops into the Battle of Mogong. Now, Mogong, of course, here we have 3,500 men of the 77 Brigade, Calvert's Brigade, fighting without artillery, fighting without heavy equipment. They managed to co-opt some Chinese artillery, but they were fighting conventional battle at the end of 2 months of exhausting fighting in Upper Burma, and it wasn't what what Wingate had originally planned for this force. And this is part of the problem here. We have the strategic and the operational picture changing dramatically, and the troops being forced to do what was necessary, not what they were trained to do. The story of Mogong is a very interesting one, which I would encourage you to have a look at if you have the opportunity. But I'll just give you an example of one of the battalions. This is the 3rd 6th Gurkhas, who entered Mogong at the start of the battle with they entered the beginning of Thursday with 715 men, and at the end had suffered 485 casualties. But look at those awards: 2 Victoria Crosses, 2 Distinguished Service Orders, and 6 MCs, and so on. On this photograph, very famous photograph, the man on the left is Michael Calvert, the Brigadier at 77 Brigade, Mad Mike Calvert, quite an extraordinary soldier. The man behind him is Colonel Freddie Shaw, who is the commanding officer of the 3/6 Gurkha Rifles. And the man on the right is a man who some of you might know. His name is Major Lumley, and he's the father of our own Joanna Lumley. Right, we've run out of time, so I just need to leave a few thoughts for you. And a few days ago, I said to you, right, we need to really think about what all this means. So the acid test has got to be strategic, or if you prefer, operational effect. So how does the operation contribute to the strategic objective that had been set for it? I'm not going to give you the answer, because I think this is something which you can think about yourselves. We can all have views about it, but the question really is, were the Chindits in 1944 directed at the right target? I think the LRP idea was the right thing. I think Wingate had the right idea. I'm not entirely sure that it was delivered in the most appropriate way. And I think that the strategic objective is always the thing that needs to be carefully evaluated. I think the problem in 1944 with Wingate was that he was given his head. And any of you who ride horses know that if you give the horse a head, they can take off and do their own thing. They need to be strictly kept under the rein. And I think there were a number of opportunities for the Chindits in 1944 that would have been better in terms of their contribution to strategic effect than where they ended up between Indaw and Myitkyina. And basically, the two options were, well, why weren't they simply flown in to operate around Stilwell's operation moving south? The reason for that is politics. The other is, well, why couldn't they have been placed on the Chindwin to be able to interrupt or intercept or destroy the Japanese lines of communication into Yugo, into Operation C. And indeed, Joe Lintain, in a series of lectures he gave, he became the commandant of the Staff College in India after the war, asked the same question and said, on reflection, we were probably too far away for the amount of resources. Remember, 300 aircraft with 535 trained pilots and aircrew, and 6 highly trained brigades milling around, bumping into a division's worth of Japanese in the area of Indaw. Was it worthwhile? Well, I'll leave you to ponder that. And the second question is what I've just discussed. So I think that's probably where we should end it now. Otherwise, I'm going to go over my time and Bertie's going to tell me off. And if you want to ask any questions, then do so. I've just remembered, Bertie, I was given a few questions before. Look, air superiority simply means being able to control the air so that you have freedom of movement on the ground. In 1942, the Japanese had complete air superiority. In 1943, it was changing. One of the reasons for that is a dramatic build-up of Allied aircraft, Indian and British, in eastern India, and also a reduction in Japanese aircraft. And but the difference between the Japanese and the British is quite stark. The British actually wanted transport aircraft. Japanese didn't have any transport aircraft, but they, by goodness gracious me, they could have done with some in Yugo to support their own troops. Someone mentioned the Spitfire. Yes, the Spitfire arrived out in the Far East at the end of 1943 and made a dramatic difference in terms of achieving air superiority, so that by the time Imphal and Kohima came around, then the Spitfires were able to fight the air battles that enabled successful air transport operations to take place on the ground. Lots more we could say about that, but we don't have time. Bertie.
Thanks, Rob. I'm sorry we're so rushed. Of course, if we were doing this thing properly in Myanmar, you'd have a whole day to go through these topics, not 1 hour. So you're doing a very good job in condensing all the content into 60 minutes. So we had one question about Joanne Lumley's father, but you've addressed that one. Malcolm is asking what the Japanese sources today make of the 2 Chindit operations and how successful they are regarded in Japan.
It's a great question. No one in Japan is talking about this, to be honest. The Japanese but look, immediately after the war, the British were very keen to try to understand from the Japanese what they thought of the Chindits, and there was grudging acknowledgement that they were a nuisance, and that's really the extent of it. So what the Japanese managed to do was get together about a division's worth of troops to counter Operation Thursday, but they were second-class troops. They weren't the leading troops fighting in Yugo. They were railway troops, they were rear echelon individuals, and they weren't, I hesitate to say this, but they weren't top-class fighting groups. In Mogong, the Japanese had 4,000 men. Wingate, Calvert had 3,500 men, and he attacked without artillery. And he won the day in Mogong through sheer bloody-mindedness and the courage and fortitude of his troops. But I don't think that would have happened were he doing the same in Kohima, for instance, or anywhere up the Tiddim Road. The truth is that Operation Thursday did not change Japanese plans at all. So I've given the game away. I've explained why I think that there was limited strategic effect for Operation Thursday, because the Japanese, strategic effect is to persuade the enemy to do things they wouldn't otherwise do. Japanese changed no plans. And one of the reasons for that is they didn't have significant lines of communication. If you have a line of communication, you can disrupt it. But if you don't have a line of communication, you're not going to change anything. Remember, Motoguchi went into India really carrying everything with him that he wanted to sustain his troops by. And any operations in his line of communications would have been an irritant, but nothing more than that. And that's the truth.
But what about in terms of the support given to Stilwell and his siege at Myitkyina? I mean, how much did Mad Mike's antics have in helping out?
Okay, not initially, but certainly at Mogong, very, very significant. And Stilwell was very, very grateful. A very difficult character, wasn't very happy at the start of Mad Mike's contribution at Mogong, but actually they did a dramatic task. So between the 23rd of June 1944 and the 5th of July, Mad Mike had cleared out the Japanese from Mogong, and Stilwell was very grateful indeed because his right flank had been secured. That was one of the, oh, and I'd forgotten this, that was one of the most dramatic battles of the Burma campaign. And in fact, it was the first Burmese village to be liberated, if we're allowed to use that word, in Burma in 1944. And it was as a result of Mad Mike. But before that, the operation of the railway corridor, no effect on Stilwell whatsoever, because the 18th Division weren't impacted dramatically by it. Just another point that will be of interest to you. When these operations were completed and what had been Lentane's, first of all, Wingate's and Lentane's forces withdrawn, the 36th British Division were flown into Myitkyina, and they then carried out the clearance of the railway corridor from the north down to Mandalay to join up with Slim's forces crossing the Chindit and the Irrawaddy, which we'll talk about tomorrow night.
I suppose, just to finish up, however one judges the effectiveness of the Chindits, with a character like Wingate at the front, it's always going to be debated and talked about and written about. Yeah. And it's amazing reading some of the sort of character portraits that his fellow soldiers drew of him. And one that stuck with me is John Masters describing as lacking humanity and hating his fellow man. Just quickly, your thoughts on Wingate the man. I know you spoke about at the start, but he does seem like a...
Yes, I think that's right. So it's about time that I plug my new book. I'm writing a new book called A War of Empires. And it's really a digest of the last sort of 20 or 25 years of thinking about the Burma campaign. And it's worth saying, I mean, I'm using a lot of the material that I've researched before and published in various places, but I'm bringing it together in a single place. And I've had the opportunity of rethinking Wingate. I did have for some time, I think I've gone through 3 phases of thinking about Wingate. The first was that he had an aberrant personality that drove the decisions he made, and that's probably fair enough, and a lot of people hold that view. I then went through a very short period of time thinking that he was mad, and fair enough, a lot of people hold that view as well, and there have been PhDs written on the subject. But I'm now at a different place, and I don't think he was he had an aberrant personality, but I don't think it was dominantly so. I don't think he was mad. He certainly wasn't mad. He was a man who was able to engender quite remarkable loyalty amongst his men, even though Masters mentioned the fact that he was inhumane, and he was in many respects. He saw the task to be much more important than the man. And it's very interesting, actually. The best book on the Chindits by Shelford Bidwell, in my view, came out in 1979, quite old, tries to puncture the Wingate myth. He's very, very respectful of the Chindits and Wingate himself, and I still think this is the best book. Identifies this with Lentane. He says that Lentane didn't have the nastiness that's necessary in a commander that Wingate had. Wingate was happy to tell his men to go away and do things that would result in their deaths, and Lentaigne was too precious of his men to do that. It's a very interesting argument, actually, and it's one of those arguments among professional soldiers that rages, you know, the extent to which you're happy to send men to their deaths because it's the right thing to do and not because you're not thinking about them. So I think Wingate was a religious exceptionalist. I mentioned earlier, his whole upbringing was deeply imbued in the language and life and ethos and culture of the Old Testament. He expected hostility. He expected that life would be hard. He expected to be challenged. He regarded himself as a prophet. And this is why I put up on the slide the Peter the Hermit preaching the Crusades. That Slim had identified this as a particular issue with Wingate. And I think it's very true. When you get these people who do believe in their exceptionalism, they are set apart, they are holy, they are appointed for a particular purpose, a divine purpose even, then it's very hard to get them to move from their position of intellectual power, their knowledge that what they're doing is right and what everyone else is doing is a distraction and needs to be destroyed. And he was very much like that. And I think it's one way, it's a new way perhaps of thinking about Wingate. But you know, I said right at the start, try and separate out Wingate as a character. But it's fun actually to think about who he was as a character. And as you said, you know, there are 16,000 troops out there who all had their individual ideas about Wingate, and we've had everyone since arguing about Wingate. Think about what he tried to achieve, think about what he did achieve, and think about whether it was the right thing for Burma in 1942. I mean, we have run out of time, but I've got lots of views on the subject.
No, Mark, I mean, just my final point quickly. When I read Steve Jobs's biography, I was minded by Wingate, that focus, that eccentricity, that nastiness, but also the extreme loyalty that he inspired in his close-knit team around him.
Oh yes, there were people who like Meads and Calvert who went to their deathbeds fanatically loyal to Wingate's life, legacy, and myth. It is absolutely extraordinary how he was able to engender that loyalty.
Well, look, Rob, we'll leave it there. We've got a few quick comments I'll just read out, then we'll probably have to let you go. Malcolm says he thinks Wingate just like Gordon of Khartoum.
Yes, yeah, he was related to him. Distantly.
Got a message from Pamela as well. Pamela, I'm going to send that one on to Rob, and maybe we'll try and get back to you either by email or in tomorrow's session. Look, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again for Rob. We'll be back tomorrow for the penultimate session. It is Saturday night, so I do highly recommend that if you're not eating tea, then do make one of yourself a Pegu Club or a Strand Sour. I may do that as well, and we look forward to hearing about Myitkyina and the race to Rangoon, and we'll see you all then.
Look forward to seeing you all tomorrow night.
Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night, Rob. See you tomorrow.
Night, Bertie. See you tomorrow.